Christmas morning, 1847. Before the sun rose, before the bells rang, before a single hymn reached the cold air of southern Louisiana, 300 people disappeared. Not ran, not revolted, not buried. They vanished. When the overseer unlocked the slave quarters at Dawnfield Plantation, the doors swung open to silence. No breathing, no coughing, no whispers. Only chains, still warm, lying in neat circles on the dirt floors, as if bodies had simply stepped out of them. 300 men, women, and children were gone. No blood, no footprints, no broken locks. The fields were untouched. The river showed no signs of crossing. The woods, dense and unforgiving, offered no trail, no snapped branches, no dragged feet. And yet, something had moved through the plantation that night. Because every clock in the main house had stopped at 3:17 a.m. Every dog refused to enter the quarters again, and every church bell within 10 miles rang once, by itself, then cracked down the middle. This is not a story found in textbooks. It survives in court affidavits never filed, in sermons never preached aloud, in a ledger marked, closed by order of the parish, and in a single phrase repeated by those who witnessed the aftermath. They didn't escape. They were released. What Dawnfield Plantation was hiding had been buried for generations, beneath hymns, beneath laws, beneath the language of salvation. And on Christmas Day, something ancient came to collect. Dawnfield Plantation was praised as orderly. Visitors described it as peaceful, God-fearing, proper. But Dawnfield had rules that other plantations did not. No drums, no singing after sunset, no naming children after ancestors, no gatherings without church approval. The enslaved were baptized not into faith, but into obedience. The plantation chapel stood at the center, not the edge. Attendance was mandatory. Sermons were short. Confessions were public. Every Sunday, the preacher reminded them, God hears everything, even thoughts. What no visitor ever saw were the rooms beneath the chapel, built by enslaved hands, sealed with limestone and prayer. They were called instruction chambers. That was the official term. Inside, elders were separated, families reassigned, names rewritten in ledgers, oral histories erased. Children were taught hymns before language, silence before speech, fear before memory. Because Dawnfield's true crop was not cotton. It was control, and control required forgetting. Christmas Eve was the most dangerous night of the year, because memory becomes loud when people gather, and hope, no matter how beaten, always tries to speak. That night, the preacher delivered a sermon that ended early. No blessings. No amen. Witnesses later said he left shaking. By midnight, every lantern in the quarters went out at once. Not blown, not extinguished, simply gone. The chains should not have been there. Most plantations kept restraints locked away unless punishment was required. Dawnfield did not. Chains were worn at night. For protection, the overseer claimed. Yet every shackle found that morning was unbroken, uncut, unforced. They were placed, each set arranged in a perfect circle, each circle facing east, each bearing a symbol carved into the dirt beneath. Not African, not Christian, older. The sheriff refused to catalog the markings. The parish judge sealed the photographs, and the preacher burned his own Bible 3 days later. One enslaved woman had been 9 months pregnant. Her chains were empty. Beside them lay a length of cloth, cleanly folded, embroidered with a word no one could translate. No footprints led away. Instead, witnesses reported the ground inside the quarters felt hollow, as if something beneath had shifted, as if the plantation itself had exhaled. 6 weeks later, a clerk discovered a second ledger hidden behind the chapel altar, not listed in any inventory. Every page was written in the same hand, over 50 years. Names appeared, then vanished. Entire family lines ended without death records. Beside many entries was a single word. Returned. Returned to where? The final entry was dated Christmas Day. 300 names. One line beneath them all. Debt paid in full. The clerk resigned that night. He never spoke again. And Dawnfield Plantation closed within a year, officially due to financial instability. Unofficially, no one would work the land. Crops failed. Wells dried. And at 3:17 every morning, the ground beneath the old quarters still groaned. The nearby town held its Christmas service as usual. No mention of Dawnfield. No prayers for the missing. Instead, the preacher warned of false freedom and ancient lies wearing human faces. Parents reported their children waking with dirt under their fingernails. Old men dreamed of voices counting backward. And on Christmas night, every year afterward, chains were heard moving beneath the abandoned chapel. Not dragged, unlocked. 5 miles from Dawnfield stood St. Bridget's orphan home. White walls, iron gates, built in 1819 by the same donors who financed the plantation chapel. Officially, St. Bridget's took in children without lineage. Unofficially, it received children who remembered too much. Runaways' children. Children who spoke names no one recognized. Children who sang songs without language. Town records show a sudden influx of 300 empty beds being ordered 2 months before Christmas. No children arrived, but the beds were used. Nuns reported hearing footsteps at night. Small ones. Bare. Many at once. Yet roll calls never changed. The basement of St. Bridget's was never blessed, because it was already sealed. Beneath it lay tunnels, older than the church, leading toward Dawnfield's chapel foundation. No maps acknowledged them, but the stone matches, the mortar matches, and the symbols carved into the tunnel walls match the ones beneath the chains. The orphanage ledger contains a single annotation written the night after Christmas. All debts reconciled. No further intake required. St. Bridget's closed within a decade. The building still stands. No birds land on its roof. 30 miles north was Redemption Seminary. Its purpose, to train preachers for difficult parishes. Places like Dawnfield. The seminary curriculum included courses not listed publicly. Controlled confession, memory correction, congregational silence. Students were trained not to save souls, but to reshape them. A former seminarian wrote, years later, "We were taught that suffering was a language God no longer spoke, but something older still understood." Every graduate of Redemption Seminary was assigned to plantations or institutions with one thing in common. Large populations. No witnesses. The preacher at Dawnfield had studied there. So had the head nun at St. Bridget's. So had the parish judge who sealed the disappearance. They were taught a ritual, not supernatural, not theatrical. Administrative. Systematic. The ritual was called the return. It did not summon. It released. The seminary taught that history itself could be corrected, that certain populations were displaced memories, living reminders of unresolved guilt. Their solution was not execution. It was removal. The return was a coordinated withdrawal of recognition. Names erased. Records nullified. Witnesses reassigned. Spaces emptied. When enough institutions agreed, church, court, orphanage, plantation, the people ceased to exist socially. But Dawnfield went further. Someone allowed memory to move downward. Into the ground. Into the tunnels. Into whatever predated the chapel foundation. That was the mistake. Because memory does not disappear. It accumulates. And on Christmas night, when every story insists on rebirth, 300 lives stepped out of enforced forgetting. Not into freedom. Into remembrance. At 3:17 a.m., witnesses across 3 parishes reported tremors. Not earthquakes. Breathing. The ground beneath Dawnfield expanded, then settled. Lantern flames bent inward. Water in wells rose without spilling. The tunnels beneath the chapel collapsed inward, not downward, sealing themselves. No bodies were found, because nothing had died. Something had closed. The plantation was never struck by plague, flood, or fire. It was simply emptied, as if it had fulfilled its purpose. No manhunt followed. No rewards offered. No sermons asking for their return, because to search would require acknowledging they were ever there. Instead, Dawnfield was struck from tax records. Maps were redrawn, and the phrase 300 souls missing was replaced with labor reallocated. This is how history survives. Not through lies, but through omissions. And every Christmas since, locals avoid the land, because chains still surface after heavy rain. And sometimes, very quietly, you can hear a congregation beneath the soil, not screaming, singing. The families who owned Dawnfield did not collapse. They prospered. Land redistributed. Debts forgiven. Names elevated in parish records. Within a decade, former plantation heirs became judges, bankers, school founders. They spoke often of hard times overcome, never of labor lost. But their homes shared peculiar traits. Basements without doors. Rooms that locked from the outside. Family Bibles missing entire genealogies. Children born into these households exhibited patterns. Night terrors at exactly 3:17 a.m. Aversion to hymnals. A refusal to step on soil without shoes. One family journal records a child asking, "Why do I know names that don't belong to us?" The parents sent him away to St. Bridget's before it closed. Not all memory obeyed the return. Some children, especially those born within 5 years of the disappearance, retained fragments. They drew circles. They aligned toys eastward. They stacked chains made of chalk. Teachers punished this behavior. Clergy labeled it spiritual contamination. One girl, age 7, spoke during Christmas service. They went home through the floor. She was removed mid-sermon. Her medical file shows no illness. Only one note, underlined 3 times. Persistent ancestral recall. She disappeared from the orphanage records 6 months later. No grave. No adoption papers. Only a reassigned bed number. In 1861, Redemption Seminary held an unscheduled convocation. Faculty burned ledgers. Students were sworn to silence. The curriculum was rewritten. Official cause, fire damage. Actual cause, panic. Because the tunnels had begun to reappear. Sinkholes opened in fields once worked by the vanished. Symbols surfaced intact. And preachers reported hearing sermons spoken back to them from beneath the pulpit. Not accusations. Corrections. One surviving letter from a seminary elder reads, "We believed forgetting was mercy, but memory has a jurisdiction of its own." Dawnfield was not unique. It was merely the first to complete the return. Other plantations attempted it. They failed, because Dawnfield had something older beneath it, something that recognized transaction, not blood, acknowledgement. 300 lives had been reduced to entries, and the land accepted that as payment. But the institutions that benefited remained indebted. That debt did not vanish. It transferred to their children, to their sermons, to their schools, to history itself. In 1912, a woman claiming to be 112 years old was found near the ruins. She spoke no English. Only one sentence, repeated calmly. "We were not taken. We were finished being held." She died before sunrise. Her burial site cannot be located because the ground refused to open. Christmas was not accidental. It is the only night where birth and death share language, where chains are supposed to fall, where silence is mistaken for peace. The seminary taught that Christmas weakened resistance. Hope distracts. Faith softens attention. But the land beneath Dawnfield remembered older calendars. Long before hymns, before sermons, before plantations, there were nights when the living renegotiated their place with the ground. Not through sacrifice, through release. The enslaved were forced to attend service that night, but witnesses say the final hymn was never sung. Instead, the congregation stood together, facing east, and the preacher stopped speaking, because the words had already been spoken by those who had waited generations to finish them. In 1934, a survey crew attempted to build a highway through the region. Their drill struck empty space. Below the plantation lay a chamber, not natural, not constructed. Smooth, circular, vast. The crew reported impressions in the stone floor. Not footprints, kneeling marks, as if hundreds had paused, not in fear, but recognition. The project was abandoned. The land was declared unstable. But one worker took a fragment home, stone with a carved mark. He died within a week. His final words. They weren't trapped. They were concluded. One document escaped destruction. A personal letter written by the Dawnfield preacher, but never sent. It reads, "I believed I was guiding them toward obedience, but I was only delaying an ending that belonged to them. They did not flee. They fulfilled." At the bottom, written later, in a different hand, "All things returned to where they were last denied." The handwriting does not match any known individual. There are no ghosts at Dawnfield. No screams. No apparitions. Only absence. And absence terrifies institutions more than violence. Because absence cannot be punished. The land has never been reused. Every attempt fails. Not dramatically. Quietly. Paperwork vanishes. Contracts dissolve. Investors forget why they came. As if something beneath the soil ensures no structure rises again. After heavy rain, chains still surface. Not rusted. Not broken. Laid gently on the ground. Locals know better than to touch them. Because some debts do not want repayment. They want acknowledgement. And once a year, on Christmas morning, those who stand near Dawnfield swear they hear voices. Not begging, not warning, but counting, not forward, backward, toward zero, toward completion,